Buying Pokemon cards is very different than it once was, and the main reason for that is because there's this like lingering feeling that there's always potential for your Pokemon cards to climb in price. And not just climb, I mean Pokemon cards have had previous examples of rising 10 times of what they once sold for. So buying Pokemon cards has moved from just collecting to being somewhat of an exciting and potentially profitable hobby due to the nature of how Pokemon cards work. So the question is, how do you kind of spot the signs of Pokemon cards and their potential profits all before it happens? Now you see, over the last few years, more and more people have entered the hobby. From old school fans revisiting their love for Pokemon, I've even seen so many parents who collect sports cards, and then they can see their kids are collecting Pokemon and they're just like, wow, what is this kind of whole new world? And they've kind of jumped into the hobby. You've got complete newcomers who've never heard of Pokemon cards before, and then they just got sucked in because they saw a Wall Street Journal article speaking about the insane growth of profits as Pokemon for investments. All this has caused so much pressure on Pokemon, and the hobby has become somewhat exciting. But something to know, it's not just about endless growth, because Pokemon cards can also decline in price, and there's a lot of layers of understanding how this hobby operates, and throughout this video I'm going to be explaining that in detail. Now, the first step when identifying a Pokemon card or product is to do a deep dive into which Pokemon are the actual chase cards. So when you're investing or purchasing a set, something that's very important to check is which Pokemon are actually in the set and which of these are top chase cards. Because when there's a popular Pokemon as a top chase, it can actually do a big change on the set's overall perceived value. I mean, for example, Evolving Skies has some of the most loved Pokemon all in one set. You got Dragonite to all the evolutions, and you even got Rayquaza, and the same goes with Crown Zenith as well, having top really popular Pokemon like Dialga, Arceus, Giratina, and Mewtwo. This becomes essential when purchasing Pokemon cards because you kind of need to do your research and actually explore Pokemon far beyond than just like buying Pokemon cards. It's a really good idea. Like, one thing I actually really recommend is playing the video games, or if you've never played a Pokemon video game, try one out, because you can kind of learn and you will naturally see which Pokemon are popular. A lot of people who've been collecting Pokemon have been playing the games and knowing about the franchise ever since they were kids. So they have a very good understanding of which Pokemon kind of get major fan love, okay? These are Garchomp, Salamence, the original starter trio of Venusaur, Charizard, Blastoise. There's Lugia, there's Snorlax. All these Pokemon are insanely popular. And then what you can do is you can kind of marry that information against what's in the set. So, it's very common that, if there's gonna be a top Umbreon chase card in a set, a lot of people already can assume that that's going to be an expensive chase card based on the fact that there's so many fans for Umbreon. And there's a lot of Pokemon like this. It's not just Umbreon, you got Pikachu, you've even got Raichu, okay? Raichu's a very popular Pokemon as well. All these things matter, and they all kind of dictate whether a set is going to kind of grow in price. It's not to say that if a set doesn't have popular Pokemon that it won't grow in price. But I mean, if we look at the Sword and Shield era and we look at something like Chilling Reign, when you look at Chilling Reign, the top chase card or the most loved Pokemon that are in that set, then you have the very popular Blaziken VMAX. Now, Blaziken is a loved Pokemon, but then when you look at something like Fusion Strike, and Fusion Strike has Mew and also a Gengar as a top chase card, but I mean, when you're comparing Blaziken and Gengar, I mean, Gengar is far more of a popular Pokemon than Blaziken, even though you might like Blaziken more. The general fan base and the general amount of history Gengar has with Pokemon collectibles, you can see the massive differences in popularity for like a set like Fusion Strike versus Chilling Reign, even though Chilling Reign is technically a little bit older. Those things are important, and that's why if you do your research and you look into sets, you can find that information, and then you can make better decisions when purchasing. So it's always good to get a good visual set list of like any Pokemon set that you purchase, and then look at the top chase cards or look at the most desirable cards in the set and all the illustration rares, and try pick apart which Pokemon are popular and which artworks get people talking, and that way you can kind of make decisions. It is very rare for a set to have very, very expensive chase cards and then the sealed product not be super expensive as well. It almost doesn't happen. Though what can happen is you can actually have very expensive sealed product but not have expensive chase cards. Something like Rebel Clash is a big example of this. Rebel Clash is, pretty expensive to buy like a sealed ETB, but when you look at the chase cards, they're not actually that expensive. Now, the second area is you always have to keep an eye on the market. tracking your collectibles puts you in the driver's seat as you can get a good overview of the hobby. Now, like I said, tracking your collection is very important to see how it moves. And honestly, one of the best ways to do that is by using the Collector app, who are the sponsors of today's video. Now, Collector is not just a place to store your collectible information, it's a full-blown collectible portfolio manager that updates pricing in real time. So you can actually get a live overview of your collectibles in the current market. Collector lets you see what your collection is actually worth, and what's even more important, where it might head next. A cool aspect of Collector is the Set Analytics tab. Right here, you can actually dive super deep into the history of any previous set, and you can actually identify all the market movers, and you get a full breakdown of all the card rarities in the one place. Now, if you do upgrade to Collector Pro, it actually does unlock a heap of features, and one of the coolest ones is the ability to scan your cards using your phone's camera into the app. This really speeds up adding your items to your collection. Honestly, a massive shout out to Collector for sponsoring today's video. You can find all the details to download the Collector app in the video's description. Now let's jump back into the video. As I was saying, tracking your collectibles becomes so important because when you track your collectibles, you learn so much more information, and you can also be very kind of aware of price swings and hype movement. You know, just like tracking anything that has price movements and things, a lot of people, when they see their collectible portfolio going into the red, or, you know, they can see it coming down, it's like, oh, but I've just had this growth and now it's coming down, they can freak out. One really big thing to do is let the cycles kind of play out. You know, I surf a lot, okay? And in surfing, there's so much waves. Now, what's really interesting about surfing is that no wave is ever the same. Every wave, even though they might look the same, they always have a different kind of intensity, they have a different drop off, you know, they're always different how they come. But sometimes when you're surfing, you'll be chilling there and you'll be waiting for a wave for a real long time. And then, you know, the wave comes and you can actually catch the wave. That's kind of like how collectibles work as well. You know, you're gonna get waves of where everything's flowing for you, when everything just works and, you know, your collection's going up and things seem great. You know, you bought something and it's doubled in price, or, you know, you might be very lucky and you get one of those crazy outlier cards that, you know, grow 7 or 8 times in price, or even 10 times the price. It does happen, okay? But then you can get cards that just go nowhere for years, or cards that, you know, fall off the face of the earth in terms of popularity, or, you know, the Pokemon isn't that interesting, or, you know, people don't have a connection to that card. You just got to learn how to play those waves, and timing in the hobby is so important. Let the hobby kind of work in your favor. When you just allow things to happen, it really becomes better and it becomes a more enjoyable hobby. Meaning, if prices are going to come up, they're going to come up because there's demand and people want it. I always find it good to just wait and see how things work, because like I said, when you track and you can see it, a little pro tip when tracking your collectibles as well, don't just always look at them every day and just, you know, be so hyper fixated if something rose like a little bit in price and then dropped down. It's much better to just kind of set and forget. If you got something in your collection, leave it there. If you genuinely love it and you're just happy to have it in your collection, then that's great. But if you don't want it and you're always just looking at your collectibles, it's probably a good idea to part with that item. If it's giving you a lot of stress and you just, oh, is it up? Is it down? Oh, I got to get, then it's probably best to sell it, because you don't really want it in your collection. You want it for profit, and that's when it becomes a problem. It is true that Pokemon cards can spike super quickly, but what's much better is just build a very long overview of how cards should rise. Sometimes they're going to be great, man. Sometimes the hobby can, you know, work in your favor. But, you know, one of the issues is, and like, it's becoming a big thing that people just want their cards to rise quickly, and it's like, you know, a quick flip, and that's kind of become a bit of a problem, because you've got so many different people entering the hobby, kind of expecting it to go one way, and it's created a little bit of kind of a toxicity or toxic energy within the hobby, because people just expect things, and, you know, a lot of people get mad because if people are too focused on pricing. The thing about what I like Pokemon cards is because you get to blend. It's one of the very rare areas that you can blend hobbies kind of with a way that they grow as well. One thing that a lot of people kind of get confused is they think if something's a hobby, oh no, that just has to be a hobby, man. And what you do for work, you just need to, you know, you need to slave away for your wage, or you need to invest in all the traditional investment forms, because that is how you make money. And that is, you know, that it's black or white, okay? And that's why I like Pokemon cards. And I think that's why so many millennials have jumped into Pokemon cards, because it's like, hey, you know what? I don't have to invest in all these, like, you know, gas companies that you're telling me, or because that's what, you know, adults do. You know what? No, you know, I don't want to do what my parents did. I don't want to do what my, what my, boomer boss is telling me to do. I want to do what I want to do, which is, buy into a franchise that I've loved since I was a kid and I have a great connection to. I actually learned from a mentor, and I've spoken about this story a little bit, but it was such a big pivotal moment for me. And the lesson that he taught was only invest in what you truly understand. Now, this guy was, he made big bucks, okay? And he was investing in things that everyone told him what he should do. He was getting like professional advice, okay? And what was interesting, as the years were going on, he noticed that a lot of his investments weren't actually that good, or like the advice that he was taken to buy wasn't that good. But where he was actually smashing it beyond belief is all of the artworks he was purchasing, because he was a massive art collector. And him and his wife both collected artworks, okay? And all the artworks they bought, he, researched it. He took the time. He understood it. He understood everything about it. So when he purchased these, he would see huge appreciation with his art collectibles. What he started doing is realizing, hey, why am I investing in things that, mainstream, or what people are telling me to focus on? Why don't I actually purchase what I understand, okay? And that's my actual mentality. The same goes with Pokemon cards, because his best and most success was purchasing art collectibles. And my kind of most success in any investing space has been with Pokemon collectibles. Now, the reason isn't because I guess like a lot of people could say, oh, anything you buy Pokemon card has risen over the years. That's true, but it wasn't always like that as well. Sometimes you had to make smart plays. Everything that I've done is because, I've learned the franchise. I've played it since I was 4 years old. I've gone through every single generation from, seeing the Kanto region, to seeing Ho, seeing when they introduced Mega Evolutions and how people were a little bit confused, seeing when they put out Z moves and a lot of people didn't like that, seeing Gigantamax and, when Sword and Shield came out and people were just really annoyed and why they've introduced Dynamax and Gigantamax and how it doesn't feel like Pokemon anymore and Pokemon's going to die out because no one's going to collect Pokemon or purchase Pokemon games at the time, people were saying, because, no one wants to see Gigantamax and these huge Pokemon, and now people are getting a little bit nostalgic for that. Or, when Scarlet and Violet came out and people were so angry at the frame rate and, the terrestrialized, Pokemon and the crystals and the weird hats, and people were complaining about that. Going through that journey and learning all those eras, coming all the way up to now, it gives you a long history and a good understanding. So when I'm buying Pokemon cards, I'm not buying them because, I'm just buying into something I have no idea about. I actually really, really understand it. And it's kind of an understanding that's become so deep and so layered that it makes me actually make good decisions just by design. And that's the interesting thing. Also, because I run this YouTube channel and I have just so many people talking and, Phil, what's going on? And, they argue in the comments and people just always are giving me so much information. That information gets extracted and it sort of becomes part of me, and I then get to make better decisions when I purchase Pokemon collectibles. And Navarre Ravikant always says you can't compete with someone who enjoys something that you feel like it's work. Or that's kind of roughly what he paraphrased. And the way how it goes is, I personally like editing my YouTube videos, okay? I like filming YouTube videos. I like, making content, and I like speaking with an audience. I like running a Discord. I like doing all those things. To me, it's enjoyable, okay? So if you're trying to now enter content creation, or if you're trying to do something and for you it feels like a drag, you start doing it, you're just like, this sucks, dude. I don't like it. Every time I have to film a video, it's draining my soul. If you're doing that, with all due respect, how are you going to compete with someone who loves doing it? Or same goes if you love running marathons, right? And you are obsessed with running marathons, and every day you're out doing a marathon and you're getting personal best and you're beating records. How on earth am I going to compete with you when I do a marathon? Brother, put a fork in me, I'm done, I'm barbecued. You think I can be bothered just panting, just like, feel like I'm gonna die. I need an asthma puffer. I'm just like, dude, this is torture. How am I going to compete with someone that goes on a marathon? It's the best thing they've ever seen in their life. How am I going to compete with someone that loves a marathon? And the same kind of goes is how are you going to compete with someone when a lot of people who love purchasing Pokemon cards, and if you just want to jump in and buy Pokemon cards, well, it's going to be hard for you to kind of get on the same level, because a lot of people who love purchasing collectibles or investing in them, they love researching it. They actually find it something that they love to do in their pastime. They find it exciting. It's an awesome hobby hobby for them. Whereas you might not have that same passion, so it's going to be hard to compete with people. So, that's why it's important, when you're buying these collectibles, know that you're doing it for the right reasons, but also have that nice long time horizon. Now, also, if you do have questions or you want to discuss the Pokemon hobby, a great place to do this is my channel's official Discord server. We have over 10,000 members and we're really growing at a good rate. The server invite is in the video's description. Now, another area is just make sure to keep a very strong focus on what's happening with Pokemon at any given time. Whether this be Pokemon Go or, how Pokemon TCG Pocket came to popularity or, a new video game, because it makes all the difference. One thing that's essential about Pokemon that you should understand is that nearly everything that gets introduced into the TCG or in any area of Pokemon always starts with the video games. So, whether that's Mega Evolution, whether that's a Dynamax, like I mentioned, or Gigantamax, or whether that's the Terastallized phenomenon, that first comes out in the video games and then it comes out in Pokemon cards. Now, one thing you can actually do if you're aware of this and you follow or play the games, you can actually kind of predict what's going to become popular in the TCG. Now, one thing that I actually predicted quite well was when Pokemon Legends ZA got announced, right? It didn't get released. It just got announced that, Legends ZA was coming and Mega Evolution Pokemon were returning. I made the link that, hey, old school Pokemon cards are going to be desired again. It's likely we're going to get Mega Evolution Pokemon back in the TCG, and then that's going to cause some upwards pressure on older Pokemon cards. Now, I actually did say that back in early 2024. I made that prediction, and that's because of just having that understanding, right? So there might, something might come up. There might be a new Pokemon game that reintroduces Gigantamax Pokemon, or, something that makes tag team Pokemon cards, get reintroduced. If that happens, or if you get some sort of intuition that might happen, then guess what? Some previous Pokemon cards or, old school Pokemon cards that had those features or had those attributes may also get caught in that hype wave, because that's kind of how it works. Now, with all that said, a lot of the people who are collecting also need to learn about the few fundamentals and kind of what mistakes to avoid. And the exact mistakes to avoid can all be seen within this video on screen right here. Within this video currently appearing on screen, I go deep into the common mistakes about the Pokemon hobby. If you enjoyed this video, definitely feel free to click the video that's currently appearing on screen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next video.